Welcome back to the garage, guys. Today we are going to address a concern that was brought up to me about my cage. But before we get into that, I'd like to show you the shirt that I bought when I first started this project. Now, I'm called the binder builder because I used to build old International Scouts, which are called binders. Well, when I got the bug, it was like teaching an old dog new tricks, right? So I saw the shirt online. I thought it was a perfect segue into the bug build, and so I picked it up. I thought that was pretty good. Anyway, I'm wearing it today because one of my viewers actually mentioned me being an old dog and needing to learn new tricks when he brought up a concern about my cage. So today, I'd like to address those concerns and let you guys know why I make the decisions I do regarding my cage and my safety. On today's video, we're going to be talking about the three big ways of bending tube. You've got the ram or press benders, you have the roll benders, and you have a compression benders. I'm also going to touch a little bit on the rotary draw benders as well as the mandrel benders. This is really for those people who are looking at buying a bender and not sure exactly what direction they want to go on. I'm not trying to pretend to be like the expert. There's awesome fabricators out there and they all have different preferences and likes and dislikes. I don't pretend to be any particular pro. I just know what I like and thought I would share some feelings, especially since there's a gentleman who shared some criticism or concern over some of the things he's seen me do. Now, again, I'm not the expert. I'm not trying to be the expert. I'm not pretending to be the expert, but this is just some information that I thought I would share for all of those who might be interested on a fresh and basically an honest opinion. But with that, let's get going. One of the big concerns that came up while I was building my cage was that, as one viewer put it, I was putting a bunch of kinks into the tube in order to make the bend that you saw there. And I'd be much better served if I had bought a tubing roller from Harbor Freight and tried to roll it properly, like most people do. And I'll be straight up, my initial thought of rolling the tube, what came from, a lot of you guys have seen Doug Bug Builder, where I don't think his name is actually Doug, but he was building two chassis, one called Ratchet and the other called Molar, and they were basically, he would roll the tube, and I thought that was pretty cool. I liked the way it stuck up into the bug and was provided as much headroom as possible. Now, he went a completely different direction as far as using skins, not a bug body, but all the same, the initial thought to roll the tube was from Doug. Or Doug Bug Builder, and I appreciated that. So of course, as anyone would, I went to, and as he did, went to Harbor Freight and got myself one of their tubing rollers in order to do exactly what I saw Doug do. So I initially tried that, but as some of you saw, that was an epic failure on my part. I think I over tightened the set screws, and it didn't quite work, and kept getting stuck. There was a bigger reason why that wouldn't work for me. And this goes along with what the criticism was on my cage as far as deforming and kinking the tube. Now, if you haven't bought one of these tube rollers before, Harbor Freight gives you three dies, a 2-inch, an 1.5 inch, and an inch die. All of them are great dies for that size tubing. But what size tube am I using for my bug? I'm using 1.75 inch. So if I were to use an 1.5 inch die, it literally wouldn't fit into the rollers, right? And I couldn't get it to roll. The other problem, if I use the 2-inch roller, I have the opposite problem. So why wouldn't the tube roller work for what I had? I had the wrong dies. So even if the machine didn't break, the problem would have been this. So here it is, the tube in the dies, 1.75 inch tube in a 2-inch die. Couldn't go the opposite, couldn't go too small, it wouldn't fit in there. The problem is these dies are specifically formed in order to keep the structure and the shape of the tube without destroying it. Now, as these go in and out, the tube slightly bends over and over as you go back and forth, conforming the tube into a long arced radius, right? The problem is as this pushes down, it should be pushing on this whole surface. But it wouldn't. It would only push on the top. And it would deform the tube into more like an oblong as the tube, the weaker material, conforms to the dies, the stronger material, and that would become oblong, and the tube itself would become completely, well, compromised, if you ask me. So this is why the tube roller did not work for me. So right off the bat, I couldn't find an 1.75" die. That would have been awesome, but I couldn't. I will say that Swag Off-Road makes a kit that makes this tube roller much more robust and beefy, as well as give it a much better way to crank and do fast results. And so go ahead and check out Swag Off-Road if that's something that you're interested in, doing something of that nature. The next kind of bender I wanted to talk about is the press bender or the ram bender. This is commonly referred to as like the muffler shop benders. You always see these in muffler shops. And what it does is it allows a press or a ram to be used to drive a single curved die into a tube with two outer dies on the other side. So what happens is basically you have two dies on the opposite side, and then a radiused die that will press into the center of the bend. Now, as it presses into that, the dies on the back side will conform around as the tube is bent. So you got a press or a ram. That's why they call it a press or ram bender. A lot of us just call these muffler benders or muffler shop benders. And what it does, like I said, it just presses in the middle and conforms the tube via pressure in one single spot to make the bend. The problem with this type of bender is as this die goes against the tube, if your tube isn't strong enough, you will get a monster kink, a monster deformation that will literally compromise the strength of the tube. Now, in a muffler application, all you got to make sure is air is going through this. It's not structural, so it doesn't matter. The only thing that it does is it can compromise the flow because you are creating a smaller space as that tube comes in on itself. In a roll cage application, where you're actually expecting the tube to hold up to some load, the deformation in the tube at the point of the bend can and will create a weak spot. And as you see some of these pictures I'm putting up, these are all pressure bends or ram bends from a muffler shop. Some of them are highly engineered. You see one that's a ripple bender. This is the ripple bend where you can literally, the die itself has ripples in it. They should not be used in roll cages. If you have a roll cage that is bent with this type of bend, it would behoove you greatly to either replace the cage, or if that's not an option, gusset the heck out of it. I mean, we're talking like, so let's say this was one of those where you can, you see the bend. This is not a press bend, bender bend, but what you can do is just stick some plate, have it trimmed up, and just basically fill where the crinkle is, or where the deformation is, and just reinforce the bejesus out of it. The best way, I suppose, and again, I don't recommend this type of bender for roll cages, or this type of bend for structural things. I would literally put this huge, like a box tube, and cut out a box tube so that you could literally fill in this whole area so that you get all the support you can into this corner. Because if you hit and this is deformed like a press bend does, I would fear for my life, literally. All right, the most common type of bender that you see in the roll cage industry is probably this style of bender. Now, this is not the end-all be-all of all of this type of bender. This is a JD Squared Model 4. They have a JD Squared Model 3, a JD Squared Model 32. Rally has their own version of this. Pro Tools has their own version of this. Lots of benders are built this style. This style of bending is called compression bending. There's also another style similar to this called rotary draw bending. Those are a little higher end machines, much more strong, much more expensive. And but anyway, the way these things work is you put your tube in, and then it stays in place right here, right? And then as the bender goes around, it conforms the tube to the die. The die itself is radiused so that it fits perfectly the tube itself. So therefore, as you're bending your tube, the tube is supported in its shape, so it doesn't deform too much. It doesn't kink. It won't kink. It won't crush like you saw in the press or the ram benders. I think it's a better way of bending than the tube rollers because you have full support usually, especially on the inside. Now the die, the following die, that's what I call the following die. If you look at that, as it's bending the tube, how much of the tube outside diameter is being supported? You have the following die totally supporting the outside of the bend or outside of the material. You have the inner die totally supporting the inside of the material. This type of bend, I think, is the most popular in motorsports simply because it gives you good, accurate, and structurally safe bends without too much trouble, without too much deformation. What I look for, does it compromise the tube and the material as it bends? Obviously, the press or the ram bender is the worst. It makes huge divots, or the wrinkle bender makes huge divots and huge deformations of the tube, weakening it. Awesome for exhaust stuff where you don't need support, structural support, but horrible for roll cages. The best, I think, is this type of tube where when you are bending, so as you can see, here, let me put it on the bottom side. That little gap in the top, that's the only part of the tube that is not completely supported. So what would you say that's 98%? So frankly, and obviously, I think this is the best way to bend tube in a shop or garage or fabrication facility. Now there is one other type of bender, which is a mandrel bender. Now a mandrel bender works just like this bender, except for one key element. As you put the tube in, the mandrel bender will slide in another tube. Let's do it this way. So as you have your tube and you're about ready to bend, it then slides in another tube into the center of it in order to keep to support not just the outside of the material, but the inside as well. This is usually done in like beads or like some weird looking marble kind of oval looking thing. I'll show a picture of that. So that way as the tube bends, this inner tube will bend as well. But it just gives that support, the internal structural support. And therefore, if you look at one of these bends, those bends are smooth. You can't see any deformations whatsoever. And that's about as strong as you possibly can get. The problem with mandrel benders is they start about $40,000. And the one I was looking at starting a company once making nothing but roll cages. But the bender that I was looking at, there was a mandrel bender that actually had a rod that slid into there that would bend with it. Structure, the same kind of bender as this. It was probably actually a rotary draw bender, but that bender itself was over $100,000. So mandrel benders are extraordinarily expensive. I've never seen one in person in all of my years when I owned my shop and so forth. Up to the present day, I've never seen one in person. I've seen them on videos. So what was the criticism of my cage? The big criticism is as with my bender, there is a little bit of deformation as it is bent. So this is an actual bend from my actual bender. If you look right at this line, this is where the start of bend line is. I mark my bends at the start of the bend and go to the, how long I want it to be. Anyway, if you look right there, there is a slight deformation right here, right? Just ever so slight. Like I said, the internal radius is supported, the external is supported by the following die, and therefore the deformation is extraordinarily slight. Some would say it doesn't compromise the strength of the tube, the structural integrity of the tube. Others might say it does. I'm not going to argue with you on that. All I know is that every cage that we see on almost every vehicle that we see out on the dunes, on the trails, wherever we see a roll cage built, is built with this type of bender. We see them roll all the time, and they survive. My big thing is that this type of bending is more than plenty to keep the strength of the tube. So what was the actual criticism of the cage that I built? This is a piece of the rolled tube, one of the drop pieces that I had left over after I rolled the tube for my cage. Okay, and what the criticism was is, while there's no deformation on the outside of the thing, every time I did that little 2-degree bend, there is a slight little dimple, little deformation there. Some of you might be able to see that, in fact. Can you see the slight changes in the light? So there is slight deformations along the inside of the roll. And what he's saying is each one of those deformations is a weak spot. Is that true? In all honesty, yes. It is weaker in those spots than it is where it's not bent. The question is, how much of a strength issue is it? And my answer, obviously, is it's not. Now, one guy says that those are like the crush tubes of, the crush bends of the pressure or ram bender. I think that's a total crock. I don't think that's accurate at all. Is there a little bit of strength, lost in bending? Yes. And this is why I triangulated the upper part of my cage and stuff of that nature. Now, also the point was brought up that perhaps there is some agency or regulation that says, and I don't know if there is, I'm not arguing whether this is right or not, I'm not making fun of it either, that you could only allow 4 bends per tube. Okay. Or you won't pass tech and certify that the cage is okay to race in that circuit. I'm not here to argue that. I'll be honest with you. I'm not here to argue that at all. But the question becomes, how big of an issue is it? Is this straight stronger than this bent one? Yeah, I'm going to say yes, it is. No deformations whatsoever. It retains 100% of its strength. Every time you bend something, you can weaken it. Okay? Is it that big of a deal? I'm going to say no. And obviously I'm going to say no, because I'm the one who's going to be driving that bug, and obviously I'm comfortable with it. I'm going to have enough tubes, uprights, supports, gussets, in order to spread out the load so that these little insignificant weaknesses, if they are weaknesses at all, I don't think it's a big deal. And the whole reason I made this video in the first place is I'm not trying to spell out exactly how you should build your cage. Let's be honest. You should build your cage the way you feel safe, where you and your family are safe. Just like we have fire extinguishers and fire suppression systems and seat belts, we have roll cages. You should build your rig adequate for what you are going to do. You may not need an NHRA, drag racing cage or Ultra 4 cage for your Baja bug. I don't think I do. Now, will I ever drive it off a cliff? I hope not. And if it happens, I hope the safety measures that I have put into place will hold. I guess the long and short of it is there's as many ways to build these cages as there are vehicles to build them for. The point is make sure that your stuff is safe. You're comfortable with the strength of the material, of the bends, of the construction, of the structure itself, that will serve your purposes. Now, if that means you only have a seatbelt bar in the back and no overhead cage at all, more power to you. Maybe you want a complete, intricate, tied in, full-on tube chassis with double pass TIG welding and perfect copes and gussets everywhere and nothing but chromoly or DOM tube. You know what? I say go for it and share that stuff with us. A lot of guys that are watching this video, man, share your stuff. We want to see it. I want to see what you do. But if you're comfortable with it, go for it, man. Go for it. It's not what you drive, it's that you drive. It's not what you wheel, it's that you wheel. It's not what you ride, as the motorcycle guys say, it's that you ride. And to me, you know, if you're comfortable with what you got, run it. Run what you brought. So yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I hope this video was I don't know. I hope this video was helpful. I know I didn't do much fabricating. I'm sorry about that. Next time we'll do a lot of fabricating. Thanks for following along. If you made it this far into the video, please like and subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. I'll see you on the next one. I'm Damien, and this is The Brand.